In a world where everyone is broadcasting their lives, from their morning coffees to their latest vacations, some people remain notably invisible. No selfies, no polished portraits, and in fact, no curated identity. Psychology says the things we choose not to show say more about us than everything we display. So in this age of oversharing, the absence of photos is a psychological signature. It's easy to assume people who don't post themselves are shy, insecure, or avoiding attention. But psychology paints a far richer picture. Below are the deep psychological themes behind people who choose not to publish their images. Number 1. Privacy and boundaries. Some people treat their identity the way others treat sacred spaces. It's not for public display, not for casual access, not for open interpretation. They protect their face because they protect their life. In psychology, this is called boundary setting, the ability to decide what parts of yourself the world gets to see and what parts remain yours. And those who don't post their photos have mastered the boundary between the inner self and the digital stage. They are choosing what the world can access, choosing what energy they allow in, choosing how much of themselves they want scattered across servers and screens. Their silence is intentional, their absence is protection, their invisibility is clarity. The brain naturally gravitates toward boundaries because boundaries reduce mental noise, emotional exposure, and identity clutter. Psychologists even say that people with strong personal boundaries tend to have higher self-respect, lower anxiety, a stronger sense of identity, more emotional stability, and deeper internal confidence. They don't negotiate their worth through constant performance, and that's why people who don't post photos intuitively understand something powerful. When you control your exposure, you control your peace. Their privacy is self-respect. Every image you post becomes a window. Anyone can look through it, anyone can judge it, anyone can save it, use it, distort it, or misunderstand it. For some people, that level of openness feels harmless. For others, it feels like standing in the street with the curtains open. This is the psychology of emotional safety. The need to feel protected before allowing exposure. People who don't post photos aren't antisocial, and they're not shy. They simply prefer psychological safety over digital openness. They want to choose who gets to see them, not hand that power over to strangers, acquaintances, or an entire internet that scrolls without thinking. And in a world addicted to oversharing, their restraint becomes their strength. When you upload your face online, you create a public version of yourself. A digital self that can be judged, saved, remembered, and compared. But some people don't want a digital self. They don't want a curated identity or a persona shaped by algorithms, likes, and attention cycles. They want to maintain control over how they're perceived, rather than letting the internet build a version of them that may have nothing to do with who they actually are. Psychologists call this self-concept preservation, protecting your identity from external distortion. People who avoid posting photos typically value autonomy, independence, self-definition, emotional privacy, and internal validation. They live inward first and outward second. There's something undeniably powerful about people who don't broadcast themselves. It's not that they reject connection, they simply refuse to be consumed. Their life is lived, not displayed. Their moments are felt, not photographed. Their face is theirs, not digital property. In a world where everyone is performing, they remain real. In a world where everyone is choosing attention, they choose authenticity. And in a world where everyone wants visibility, they choose freedom. Number 2. Fear of judgment. Not everyone remains unseen for empowerment. Some stay unseen because visibility feels dangerous. Posting a photo might seem simple, but for someone sensitive to judgment, it can activate an entire emotional storm. Psychology calls this evaluation anxiety, the fear of being judged, criticized, or misunderstood, and it's one of the strongest forces shaping human behavior online. For them, posting a photo isn't self-expression, it's emotional risk. One image can trigger questions like, do I look good enough? What will people think? Am I being compared? Will this embarrass me later? What if I get no likes? The digital world becomes a giant mirror, and every reaction becomes a reflection of worth. In this life, humans are wired for social approval. It's a sign that rejection once meant danger, and exclusion threatened survival. Today, the brain treats online judgment through the same lens. One negative comment, one comparison, even one moment of silence after posting can activate the same neural pathways as real-life rejection. People who avoid posting photos are often highly sensitive to these cues. Not weak, just more attuned. Their brain reacts deeper, so their mind protects faster. They avoid the trigger rather than endure the emotional crash. For many, posting a photo creates a familiar mental loop. Choosing the photo, fixating on flaws, second-guessing the angle, worrying about reactions, monitoring likes, and interpreting silence as rejection. Psychologists call this rumination, the spiral of worry, doubt, and emotional noise. Some people know themselves well enough to choose peace over spirals. They protect their mental clarity by avoiding digital spaces where their image becomes a scoreboard. People who fear judgment often struggle with self-concept clarity, the alignment between how they see themselves and how they want to be seen. Posting a photo forces that gap into the spotlight. If the internal self doesn't match the external image, the emotional discomfort becomes overwhelming, so they avoid the mismatch entirely. Not posting becomes a form of emotional regulation. They're avoiding triggers. People who avoid posting are trying to protect their self-esteem, identity, emotional balance, mental quiet, and inner stability. They want connection, but not exposure. They want belonging, but not judgment. They want expression, but not performance. Their silence is protection. Fear of judgment is often misunderstood. People assume it's insecurity, weakness, or lack of confidence. But in psychology, fear is simply a message and a boundary. Those who choose not to post their photos because of judgment are emotionally aware. They understand what hurts them. They know what drains them. They honor their coping mechanisms. And that awareness, that self-recognition, is a form of wisdom. Number 3. Digital minimalism. Digital minimalism isn't about deleting your accounts or running away from technology. It's about knowing your limits and setting boundaries so your mind doesn't drown in the nonstop stream of digital noise. And people who rarely post photos often lean toward that mindset without even realizing it. Their habits look simple from the outside, but psychologically, a lot is happening underneath. The reality is, the human brain wasn't built for constant exposure. We evolved to handle small social circles, maybe 100 familiar faces at most. But today, a single photo can reach thousands of strangers. Your nervous system feels that difference even if you don't consciously notice it. Some people instinctively step away from that overstimulation. Their minds prefer a slower pace, fewer eyes, and less digital intensity. Psychologists call this low sensory seeking behavior, the tendency to conserve emotional energy instead of scattering it across a crowd of online interactions. They also understand something many people forget: the internet never forgets. And that awareness naturally creates caution. People who hold back on posting their photos tend to think long term. They feel the weight of digital footprints. This kind of mental filtering comes from identity stability and the ability to feel real without needing constant external reinforcement. Minimalists also value themselves more than the spotlight. They don't feel the need to broadcast every outfit, every meal, every moment of their day. Their inner world is richer than their online presence, and that's intentional. They choose quiet over chaos, authenticity over aesthetics, memories over content, and self-respect over self-display. It's consciously choosing not to give up personal space just because everyone else does. Digital minimalism also gives their brain something priceless: a quieter internal landscape. Every time you post a photo, you trigger a subtle psychological loop. You anticipate reactions, evaluate the likes, compare your results with others, and adjust what you might post next time. People who rarely post avoid that loop altogether. Their nervous systems stay calmer, and their sense of worth stays internal rather than algorithm-driven. Psychologists call this reduced social monitoring, and it's a major factor in long-term emotional autonomy. Another big factor: they resist the pressure to perform. The moment you post your face, you're stepping into a performance space, whether you mean to or not. You start curating angles, lighting, expressions. You take on the responsibility of how you appear to others. But some people don't want to perform. They want to live. This mindset is rooted in intrinsic motivation, being driven by inner satisfaction instead of external applause. These individuals find fulfillment in private achievements, personal growth, and real presence, not in public validation. To them, privacy is power. In a world where everyone overshares, not sharing becomes a form of control, a boundary, and a choice rooted in self-respect. Psychologists call this autonomous boundary setting, a strong predictor of emotional resilience. When you control who sees you, you control who influences you. And while some people choose attention, digital minimalists look for connection. They're more interested in real conversations than impressions. They value messages over metrics, dialogue over display. This aligns with relational depth and the preference for meaningful intimacy over surface-level popularity. They would rather be known deeply by a few than admired superficially by many. They also avoid the social comparison trap simply by removing the bait. The less you post, the less you compare. The less you compare, the better you feel. By avoiding constant visibility, they naturally reduce judgment, competition, and self-scrutiny. Their mental baseline stays more stable. That's why digital minimalism is linked to lower anxiety, stronger focus, better emotional regulation, and healthier self-image. By choosing less digital exposure, they gain more psychological freedom. Their sense of self is also built differently. They don't rely on public mirrors to feel attractive, accomplished, or valued. They have what psychologists call internalized self-concept, an identity grounded in personal truth rather than public reaction. Posting your face often invites a feedback loop, so by not posting, they remove the loop entirely. Their confidence grows independent of visibility. And at the core, they want control over their digital narrative. A photo is a limited slice of who you are. Some people want to be defined by their ideas, their voice, their work, and not just their appearance. So they make their presence intentional and strategic. not reactive or impulsive. Most importantly, digital minimalists protect their emotional bandwidth like a resource. And in psychology, emotional energy is limited. Some people feel that limit more sharply than others. Posting photos drains that energy through comments, reactions, notifications, and constant perception management. Minimalists save that bandwidth for real life, real relationships, and real growth. Their emotional world stays clearer because their digital world stays quieter. Number 4. Social anxiety versus self-control. Not everyone who avoids posting photos is doing it by choice. For some people, it's an internal tug of war and a mix of shyness, fear, and self-protection. But underneath all of that lies a surprising truth. Avoiding photos is often less about fear and more about discipline. So let's break down the full spectrum, from anxiety to intentional empowerment. For people with social anxiety, visibility feels threatening. Attention often feels like pressure. Posting a photo is like stepping onto a stage you never asked to be on. This is what psychologists call anticipatory anxiety, the brain imagining the worst before anything even happens. To avoid that stress, they choose invisibility. There's also the fear of being misinterpreted. Socially anxious individuals often worry that the smallest expression or angle could be picked apart. They become hyper-aware of posture, flaws, mood, and whether they look enough. This comes from a state of hypervigilance where they constantly scan for potential threats, including social ones. So they stay silent online because the emotional cost feels too high. But here's the twist. For many people, it's self-control. Some individuals simply don't feel the need to post. They're practicing intentional restraint. Self-controlled people care about meaning over impulse. They don't post because others expect it. And psychologists call this delayed gratification, which involves resisting instant social rewards in favor of long-term self-respect. They also don't feel a need to prove anything. High self-control builds a stable sense of identity. They don't need likes or comments to validate their existence. They have solid self-esteem, low dependence on external approval, and strong emotional independence. Their confidence is quiet, but grounded. So here's the contrast. Social anxiety hides you, but self-control protects you. One is rooted in fear, the other is rooted in choice. One says the world is too loud, the other says my peace is far too important. And understanding that difference reveals a lot about the invisible people online. Some individuals use invisibility as emotional protection. When someone's dealing with insecurity or self-doubt, avoiding photos becomes a shield against rejection. Psychologists call it self-protective avoidance. It gives people the space to grow without being watched. Others use invisibility as a strategy for mastery. They're focused on goals, building skills, or leveling up internally. They don't want to be perceived prematurely. They want their results to speak louder than their selfies. This is tied to an achievement-focused identity, where progress matters more than appearance. And here's the paradox. Sometimes the less someone shows their face, the more you actually see who they are. People who don't post photos often express themselves more honestly through their words, humor, insights, ideas, or creativity. Their identity shines because it isn't being overshadowed by their image. They communicate from the mind, not the mirror. They also value authenticity over aesthetics. A photo requires presentation. A thought requires honesty. These individuals often have high self-concept clarity, a strong understanding of who they are. They don't compete, they don't compare, and they don't curate. They simply express. They also understand that attention is a currency. Every post is a transaction. You give a piece of yourself for visibility. Minimal posters treat their identity like something valuable, not something to hand out casually. This reflects self-preservation psychology, protecting what matters most. And because they spend more time observing than performing, they often develop deeper emotional intelligence. They're reflective, mindful, empathetic, aware of how they move through the world. They don't care about impressing crowds. They care about understanding themselves. The less they post, the more they think. So while the world sees silence, psychology sees strength. Not posting doesn't mean someone lacks confidence. It means they're choosing a different kind, confidence built on intention. These habits of digital minimalism and intentional invisibility may look small from the outside, but internally, they build emotional balance, boundaries, self-image, clarity, discipline, authentic expression, and psychological freedom. And in a world obsessed with being seen, sometimes the strongest people are the ones who step back,